27. And also keeping your prayer, Cheryl Rourke's mom's Peg's memorial service, which again will be this Saturday down in Seekonk at the Knights of Columbus. So please keep that in prayer as we deliver the gospel and the message of strength, of resurrection, and hope of eternal glory. So keep that in prayer. Keep me in prayer as I speak the words that afternoon. All right, so in Proverbs chapter 27, we continue on with instructions in regard to various relationships that we have in life. We find ourselves now in verses 10 through 14. We should wrap this section up this evening, where we're talking about wisdom for daily relationships and living. And in verse 12, we noted the blessing of prudence, and that's where we left off on Tuesday night. And I just had a few things and really an example and a few closing principles that I wanted to share with you this evening in regard to having appropriate prudence, which is wisdom, discernment, understanding in life, and making good, wise decisions as you go forward. Because as the passage says, and we're going to read it in just a second, ultimately, if we do not, then we will have suffering and pain. And we're going to see an example of the suffering and pain as a result of not heeding the wisdom of God and of God's people. So in Proverbs chapter 27, verse 12, we'll start there, where it says, a prudent man sees evil and hides himself. Again, he gets away from it. He guards his soul. He protects his soul. He doesn't enter into the sin of other individuals, and he stays clear of it. It says, the naive proceed and pay the penalty. They run headlong into the evil, the wickedness, the sin, and even the human good. And as a result of that, they will pay the penalty. They'll suffer as a result of entering into those sins and the sins of the flesh, as we know. So they proceed and pay the penalty. Tonight, we're also going to note verses 13 and 14. Let me just read those, and we'll come back in a minute. It says, take his garment when he becomes surety for a stranger, and for an adulterous woman holds him in pledge. He who blesses his friend with a loud voice early in the morning, it will be reckoned a curse to him. So again, we have two very strange and odd type of proverbs here to wrap up this section, but believe it or not, they all tie together, and they all are giving a similar message, just with different examples and scenarios. And so I'll give you that in just a minute. But before we end verse 12, I wanted to tell you that this story, and I wanted to do this on Tuesday night, but we didn't have time, but the story of an individual who does not heed the wisdom of God, who does not heed the prudence of God as they should have within their life. The story is the story of Rehoboam. And Rehoboam was Solomon's son who took over the rulership of Israel upon Solomon's death. What Rehoboam then did was have a situation where the northern tribes came down to him and they tried to make a peace treaty with him and say, hey, could you ease up a little bit? Your father had heavy burdens upon us. Could you ease that up a bit? And ultimately, Rehoboam then went and sought the advice and counsel of his father's friends, his father's counselors. They gave him a certain message. He rejected their message. Then he went to the guys that he grew up with, the guys that he hung around with and was most familiar with, who were the younger men, without experience and without full wisdom, and he listened to them and did what they did. And as a result, it was disastrous for the overall kingdom of Israel. And that is the story that we see in 1 Kings chapter 12 in verses 6 through 8. So when we read this story, remember we've got a couple of things going on here. Not only having prudence in regard to making good, wise decisions and staying clear of evil and sin, but also the previous verse that said, honor what? Your father's friends. And the father's counselors, Solomon's counselors, again, were also his friends, we would say, in that scenario. And he rejected his father's friends' advice and counsel, and he paid dearly for it. So again, very interesting. So let's go to 1 Kings. It's also very much similar, same story in 2 Chronicles chapter 10, 6 and 8. But I believe 1 Kings 12, 6 through 8 gives us just a little bit more detail. So let's go back there. And again, turn back, about a quarter of the way through the Old Testament to go to 1 Kings. and then we'll get to chapter 12. And I'll read a little bit more than just verses 6 through 8. But verses 6 through 8 is the key principles that we're noting in our passages here in Proverbs. So I'll go all the way back to verse 1. So in 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 1, it says, Then Rehoboam, again that's the Solomon's son, went to Shechem, for all of Israel had come to Shechem to make him king. Now it came about when Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, heard of it, that he was living in Egypt, for he was yet in Egypt, where he had fled from the presence of King Solomon. Now, just give you a little backstory there. This Jeroboam was actually the son of one of the best servants that Solomon had, that he also was a good friend with. But then Jeroboam was a very, wise and intelligent and I guess a very charismatic individual, where he was able to get people to follow him in a fantastic way. And even during Solomon's reign, Jeroboam tried to have a rebellion against Solomon's kingship and tried to dethrone him. Solomon found out about it. Again, there's a backstory. You can read that more in the scriptures. But ultimately, what Solomon did was make a deal with him to say, I'll let you live because of your father and the relationship I had with him. You go off to Egypt and, again, be in, they call it asylum? What's, not asylum, when you go, when you go away and you're forced to leave the city and stay there. There's a word I'm looking for, but I'm just losing it right now. But in any case, he had to go down to Egypt, stay in Egypt, and live in Egypt while Solomon was reigning. But as we just read, as soon as he heard that Solomon had died, he came back from Egypt. And again, exile is the word I was looking for, okay? He was forced into exile. All right. I knew the Holy Spirit would give it to me eventually. All right, so in any case, now in verse 3, then they sent and called him, and Jeroboam and all the assembly of Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam, saying, and again, just backstory, Jeroboam was also somewhat of a leader for those northern kingdoms at that time, made up of the 10 tribes of Israel that were to the north, all right? So Jeroboam was still, had some authority, and even coming back from Egypt, they invited him into this assembly to make Rehoboam the king. Kind of interesting that they'd invite him in the first place. But in any case, in verse 4, all right, well, let me go to verse 3 again. Then they sent and called him, and Jeroboam and all the assembly of Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam, saying, Your father made our yoke hard. Therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke which he put on us, and we will serve you. So for some reason, Solomon had a heavy yoke, which probably meant taxation, what they had to contribute to the society, etc. He put a heavy burden on them, probably because they were acting up a little bit anyway, but just to keep them in line. But now they're asking for some relief, and he says, if you do that, we will serve you. We'll follow you. We'll make you king. Then he said to them, Depart for 3 days, then return to me. So the people departed, and King Rehoboam consulted with the elders who had served his father Solomon while he was still alive, saying, How do you counsel me to answer this people? Then they spoke to him, saying, If you will be a servant to this people today, we'll serve them, grant them their petition, and speak good words to them, then they will be your servants forever. And again, what is that? Have a heart of a servant, just like our Lord Jesus Christ had the heart of our servant, just as we should be a heart of a servant even when we are in authority over other individuals. Unfortunately, I wish our government would have that mental attitude of being rulers and authorities, to have that servant's heart. Okay, some of them do. I get it, okay? I think our current president does. But ultimately, most of them want to be served by us. But all right, verse 7. Then they spoke to him, saying, okay, read that already. All right, they will be your servants forever. Now in verse 8. But he forsook the counsel of the elders which they had given him, and he consulted with the young men who he grew up with and served him. So he said to them, what counsel do you give that we may answer this people who have spoken to me, saying, lighten the yoke which your father put on us? That's kind of an interesting subplot here, where, again, he probably didn't like the answer that he got from his father's counselors, all right? It wasn't what he wanted to hear. He probably didn't want to be their servant. He wanted them to serve him. So again, he rejected it. So what does he do? He fishes around and asks other people their opinion until he gets the advice that he wants to hear, rather than the advice he needs to have, okay? Very interesting. And again, people should not do that. If you go and ask somebody who you think is wise about a situation, don't go cherry picking to get the answer that you want to hear. Listen to what they have to say and then go with that, even if it's counter to what you think you should do. And again, because God has put them in your life to give you the right information. So in any case, he goes on to say in verse 10, and the young men who grew up with him spoke to him, saying, thus you shall say to this people who spoke to you, saying, your father made our yoke heavy, now you make it lighter for us. But you shall speak to them, my little finger is thicker than my father's loins. Talk about the arrogance complex of sins, okay? His little finger is thicker than the father's loins. So again, you get your thigh, it's about 30 inches round, and you get your little pinky, okay? In other words, I'm more mighty than my father. I'm more mighty than my father. That's who I am, okay? And that's what these young idiots wanted him to say. Verse 11, whereas my father loaded you with a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. Then Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam on the third day, as the king had directed, saying, return to me on the third day. Verse 13, and the king answered the people harshly, for he forsook the advice of the elders which they had given him. And he spoke to them according to the advice of the young men, saying, my father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, I will discipline you with scorpions. So the king did not listen to the people, for it was a turn of events from the Lord, that he might establish his word, which the Lord spoke through Ahijah and the Shilonite to Jeroboam the son of Nebat. When all of Israel saw that the king did not listen to them, the people answered the king, saying, what portion do we have in David? We have no inheritance in the sons of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel, now look after your own house, David. So Israel departed to their tents. Now you can continue reading on, but the last part that we just read was ultimately their succession from the kingdom of Israel, and that God had put together of the 12 tribes of Israel, and they went off and took the name Israel, and it was only the 10 tribes of the north that then became Israel, and they split away from the southern kingdom, the house of David, which was the tribes of Judah, and ultimately the tribe of Benjamin. And those two tribes made up the southern kingdom, also called Judah, later on. So in any case, because of Rehoboam rejecting the wise counsel of his father's friends and wanting to be the big guy, puffing up his chest rather than being a servant to the people, it caused the division of Israel between the northern and the southern kingdoms. But as we also read in, I think the second to last verse there, that God had foreseen this long ago and prophesied about it. Not that it was his desire for those things to happen, but he knew under divine discipline this was what was going to happen, and there would be a separation of the two, and then ultimately the later difficulties that would come to the northern kingdom and the southern kingdoms, because they would both eventually walk away from the true worship of their God. But this was the turn of events, as it were, that split the kingdom in two, because Rehoboam was a stupid, idiot, foolish young man who did not listen to the wise counsel of his father's friends. He forsook his father's friends. So again, we see the principle of Proverbs coming into play and into fruition in this little story about Rehoboam taking the throne of Israel. So we wrap verse 12 up with a couple of principles. And remember, as we talked on Tuesday night, that prudence is equal to foresight. And we ought to have foresight. Again, we don't just look, as I used the driving ed instructor analogy the other night, we don't just look right in front of our nose as to what's in front of us and just that little viewpoint of what is right there. No, we take a broader perspective. We look down the road further and take it all in so we can make wiser decisions going forward. And the prudent individual does that. When Rehoboam made his decision to come back with the harsher terms, he wasn't thinking that, oh, wait a minute, they said if I lightened, they would be my servants, but if I heavied their load, what then would they do? He didn't think about that, did he? Didn't think about how they'd reject it if they go against what they asked for. So he didn't have foresight in the situation, and it was detrimental to him, his kingdom, and the overall kingdom and nation of Israel, as you know. So the wise man pays attention to the warning signs of sin. We see the arrogance welling up in our soul. We see the sin coming down the road as it is trying to attract us and lead us into that path of life. The wise man sees that, pays attention to it, and takes the appropriate measures as not to enter into it. So he doesn't enter into the danger zone. He doesn't enter into the temptation of sin or human good or evil, and he avoids all of that, and also the unnecessary suffering and pain that goes along with entering into that type of sin, human good, or evil. Rehoboam did not see that. He entered into the harm of the splitting of the kingdom, and then greater harms later on, as you know, as well. So again, he avoids the unnecessary harm, is the one who has prudence within their soul. Yet the naive individual, another word for the foolish individual, the foolish idiot, as we could also say, the naive press forward. They keep going forward. Go forward, go forward. Let's enter into the sin. Let's enter the human good. Let's enter into the evil. And Rehoboam, let me enter into the arrogance complex of sins, and let me put a hard whip on these people. Even more than the hard whip. I'll throw scorpions at you so you get stung, okay? He enters into that path with headlong without thinking about the results that would happen. So the simple refuse the correction. They ignore the caution, and they reap the consequences as a result. Again, they would be your servants. And if you go against them, they would be what? The opposite of your servants. They would be antagonistic towards you. And even, as you think about this scenario too, he didn't even give him a chance, okay? Didn't even give him a chance. He could have said very easily, okay, I understand the burden. I understand your promise and your pledge to be servants unto me. We'll be a unified kingdom. We'll go forward. We'll have a great time. He didn't even give him a chance to do that. And at least if he gave him a chance to do that and then they went against him, then he could hold them accountable for their wrongdoing. Do you see what the little nuance there? You see, if he allowed them, okay, I'll lighten up your load. Now you pledge to me your servanthood, as you said you would. You've made an oath before me. And now if you go against that, I'm not to blame. You are. And as the king, now righteously I could bring discipline onto you, and it would be justified by my God and in the eyes of the people. You see how he could have played that a different way? At least give him a chance at first, and then he could bring the heavy whip or the heavy load onto them. But no, he just went right to the arrogance complex of sin and said, you will worship me right now, right now. So in any case, we see the idiocy, we see the arrogance complex of sin, and we don't see the forethought in his thinking. But God is telling us and warning us, hey, have that forethought, have that thinking, and have that viewpoint. Look at the entire scenario and the situation. Look for the best outcome to be without bending the rules, without offending your righteousness, and without sinning and entering into temptation, and move forward in that. And so that you are justified and that you are making good, wise decisions. And then if other people mess up as a result of that, that's on them now, and it's not on you because you've done the will of God in your life. So we are to ask God for discernment. We never make decisions on how we feel, too. This is another thing, emotional revolt of the soul. And too many people are making decisions on how they feel. I don't feel good right now. I don't feel this. I don't feel that, okay? That's the wrong mode of operation. That's the sinful mode of operation. Because when you let your feelings lead your thinking, you're outside the will and plan of God. You're not in the right order of God's plan. Our emotions are here to respond to the things, but we are in control of those emotions. We don't let the emotions rule us in what we do, what we say, what we think, or how we act. We don't let the emotions rule. It's not about how we feel good now, but it's based on the good of God in our lives for today and for tomorrow as well. And again, we make decisions based on the path that God is leading us so that we stay inside his will and plan for our lives, even when we may not agree with it 100%. As Rehoboam did not agree with the discussion of the elders and the advice and counsel that they had. He didn't agree with it. But he should have humbled himself and said, you know what? You were wise counsels to my father for all these years. You did well with him. He had a fantastic kingdom. He made good, wise decisions. You guys are now giving me that information. Even though I want to do something else, let me humble myself. I'll heed your counsel. And that is the direction I will move in. So again, he didn't even do that to stay inside the will and plan of God. So we ought to do that, not let our emotions rule, not allow emotional revolt of the soul to lead us in the things that we operate and the things that we do. So now we continue on in verse 13. So let's go back to the book of Proverbs 27. And believe it or not, all this comes together, okay? Even though we got some, I'll just say, simply tongue-in-cheek, wacky type of examples, but they all come together. And so what we're going to see now in verse 13 is about having that wisdom, that foresight, that prudence in regard to our business dealings so that we are not hurt in our transactions that we get involved in, okay? So again, similar principle, but now it's taking it down to business operations. So again, it's taking it down to a specific aspect of our life, business dealings. So as it says, take his garment when he becomes surety for a stranger, and for an adulterous woman, hold him in pledge. Excuse me. Now, I also have up on the board that, compare this with Proverbs chapter 20, verse 16, and I put it in your notes as well. But this verse is almost identical to Proverbs chapter 20, verse 16. The only difference and the only nuance is in the masculine versus the feminine gender when it talks about the foreigner in our passage compared to, the adulterous woman in our passage compared to the foreigner in Proverbs 20:16. Again, in Proverbs 20:16, it says, take his garment when he becomes surety for a stranger, and for foreigners, hold him in pledge. Now, our verse says, for an adulterous woman, hold him in pledge. But in the Hebrew, the only difference, it's the same word, but the only difference is in verse chapter 20, it's the masculine gender. In our passage, it's the feminine. And so just by changing it to the feminine, we have an adulterous woman or even a prostitute being in view. And I'll come back and tell you the importance of that. But the main principle here is that if one person acts as a cosigner for another person who they are closely related to, you as the lender should take their coat, or back in the day, their cloak, And again, they're out of coat, they're out of clothing, which was a very valuable thing back in the day. You know, you probably all have about 20 coats in your closets back home, okay? They would have one, okay? It was a very valuable article to them. So again, take that as surety. And ultimately, that surety is like a security deposit, a down payment, okay? Or a collateral against the loan that the individual is taking out. And so what we have here is, number one, we have the person who is lending money. This is what the verse is directed to. That's you and I. We're lending money, or we're lending something to someone else. Now, the person we're lending to is either a foreigner or a stranger or an adulterous woman. It's a third party. And then that individual has brought along someone else that they may be familiar with, and maybe they're not, to be what? As the guarantor of the loan that they take. Okay? And so this is a piece of wisdom to the one who is lending, but we also have principles for the cosigner as well in this situation. All right? So that's what I want to have you keep in mind. This is the message. You are the lenders, and you need to have good, wise decision-making ability when you're entering into a contract with another individual, and especially if there's a cosigner in regard to that situation. And back in the ancient days, they would look for some, as I said, collateral, a deposit or security deposit in regard to the loan if it's a third party coming in. You know, and here what we also have is the person that is actually going to receive the money from the loan, okay? They're not putting anything down. Maybe they are, but it's unmentioned here. And it's like the other party, all right, the cosigner is taking all the risk, okay? And that's a tricky thing. You don't want to be in that situation if you can help it, okay? And especially if it's a foreigner, a stranger, or an adulterous woman or a prostitute, okay? And the reason I say adulterous woman or prostitute is because it's basically just saying somebody that you know is sinful. And maybe they're not going to be credible. Maybe they're not going to have integrity in that situation to fulfill the obligation of repaying the loan. You don't know that as the cosigner, okay? And the lender doesn't know that either. You as the lender, you don't know that. So again, you have to protect yourself, because you don't know if the borrower is actually going to pay you back or not. And so therefore, if there's a cosigner, then you make sure that you have something as a down payment or a deposit, a security deposit in that situation in case they default on their loan. And as I said, the second half of this passage actually takes it up a little bit of a notch. And you see there's a Hebrew word here called nokri, and that nokri in Proverbs chapter 20, verse 16, is in the masculine gender, and it simply means a foreigner. But we've seen that word elsewhere, and we understand the nuance of it. And basically it's saying somebody that's outside your direct family, but still in some relation to you. Okay, maybe a distant relative, or maybe it's just somebody from your nation. And again, back in the day, we would say they're an Israelite. Okay? So again, there's one dealing with the foreigner who's an Israelite, not directly related to you, but then there's another time with this person that's way off that you know is also a sinner, and you know that there's a good chance they could default on their loan. Okay? So again, it takes it up a notch from what we see in Proverbs 20:16, and then rather than the borrower being someone outside your family, well, I said all that. Okay, let's go. All right, so then the next principle is, it's one thing to pledge for a stranger, okay? And that's why we have foreigner here, okay? It's kind of odd that somebody would even pledge or co-sign a loan or a mortgage or whatever the case may be for somebody they don't know, a stranger. So again, I don't think anybody would ever do that, okay? So it's kind of like a distant relative type of thing. You know, would you do that? Yeah, okay, I might do that if I have a little bit of wisdom and a little bit of understanding that I trust this person. I see some good track record in their life is what they're doing. And I'm trying to help them get to the next stage of life, okay? So it's one thing to make a pledge to that individual, yet it's another to make a pledge for a known sinner. Okay, somebody you know that doesn't have the cleanest track record, or somebody that you know is not always walking on the straight and narrow, and you're not quite sure if they're legitimate. That, well, I cleaned up my life, and I've done this, that, and the other thing, and now I want to do this, okay? Yeah, sometimes you may want to take a step, but in that you've got to be very cautious about what you're doing. As a cosigner, you got to be real cautious because now you're left holding the bag if they default. As the lender, if you're just dealing with that one person and they skip town, you're never going to get your money back, but yet there's a cosigner. So now you go to the cosigner and you try to receive what is due from them. But the first step is take some security deposit so that you know that they're going to pay it up. So if that person defaults, you know the cosigner will pay up because they want to get what? Their property back. They want to get their cloak or their coat back, a very valuable piece of item, okay? It's kind of like going to a pawn shop, if you think of that a little bit, okay? You know, hey, I'll put this down if you give me $300, okay? Well, if you come back, okay, and you return the $300, you can get your item back, okay? But if you never come back, that thing's going up for sale, and now they have collateral for the money that they gave to you that they could sell off that product and maybe get all or a good majority of that money back, and the loss may not be that great, okay? So this is having that kind of wisdom within our lives. So rather than taking his coat, also what we have here, which is interesting, as we see in the first half of our verse and of both verses, it says, take his garment when he becomes surety for a stranger. That's kind of, let's say, an extended family member, okay? Now, in our verse, and for an adulterous woman, hold him in pledge. And as I said, the Hebrew word there is the same as we have in Proverbs 20:16 of a foreigner, but in the feminine gender. So again, we know it's somebody that doesn't have a good, clean track record, all right? They're probably some kind of sinner and have some kind of problem. Maybe they have a gambling addict or something like that, okay? And you want to be very cautious around those people. But in any case, as we see in the first half of this verse, rather than taking his coat or cloak as a pledge, okay, in the second half, what does it say? And for an adulterous woman, hold him in pledge. What does that mean, hold him in pledge? Well, back in the day, if somebody defaulted on a loan like that and you were the cosigner and you didn't have any collateral, or maybe even to cosign, your collateral was what? Your life. And you would then have to become a slave, also called a bondservant, to that individual. And, you know, either that or, you know, either you become a bondservant to that individual and now you're working for them, and under the law you do that for 7 years and you could go free if you buy your way out, okay, or the 50th year automatically go free. I digress. Or they can just, whatever you own, when they say take him in pledge, whatever he owns now becomes yours as the lender, okay? So he's putting up his house, his farm, okay? His business that he might have. He's putting all that up. And if the person defaults on their loan that he was pledging for, that then becomes yours as the lender. So this is a aspect of wisdom, is to make sure you have right balance between what you are loaning someone, okay, and what you are expecting to get in return back. And if there's a cosigner in that situation, and we could even also get rid of that third party and just say with the lender too, they either have to put up some surety, they either have to put up themselves as a bondservant if they default. But in this case, we have the cosigner, the third party involved. That's that individual. Make sure you've got enough resources that you can extract from that individual to cover the loan that you gave them. Okay? So that's basically the scenario here, but it's all about what? Having prudence, having wisdom, rather than the folly. You see, the cosigner who doesn't know this foreigner, or doesn't know about this, or doesn't really know, or doesn't make a good decision about this sinful person that they're backing up in this situation, and easily can be defrauded or swindled or, you know, left holding the bag, as we like to say. That's not wisdom and prudence as a cosigner. So we have that wisdom principle and prudence principle in this passage, but as I said, it is directed first to the one who is lending in the first place. So again, we see the principles between prudence and folly in two different scenarios. As the lender, make sure you're making a wise decision so that you don't, get left, shortchanged in the situation. And as the cosigner, make sure you're not getting left holding the bag. And as I've probably told you in the past, and I think when we did this in Proverbs chapter 20, we've co-signed, my wife and I, for, both our two of our children when they got mortgages. Because, again, the kids can't get a mortgage on their own. They don't have enough track record. But when you add other incomes and other track records, like the parents, and co-sign, okay, you're backing them up in that situation. So they get the loan, but you also have to, as a parent even, have to be real sure that you have confidence that they're going to repay the loan. Because, again, it really shouldn't be on the parent who's co-signing in that situation to have to pay the loan for the children, okay? That is not a wise decision or a prudent one, because the child doesn't learn, and then you get left holding the bag. So, in any case, when you make those decisions as a co-signer in that type of situation, in any situation, or even take it out of money, okay? If you're just backing somebody up, they said a word, they told the truth. Yes, I backed them up, okay? If you're backing someone up in any realm, and again, just think of all the different ways you could back somebody up, make sure you're doing it wisely as you go about that situation. So, because you don't want to be the fool in the situation when you find out that they lied or they cheated or they stole, and ultimately now the reputation is bad for them, but it's also bad for you because what? You backed them up, okay? So, again, wisdom is in view here versus the fool. And the foolish one is the one who doesn't make a good, wise decision, and they lend money, and get, get robbed robbed blindly, or whatever the case. They get robbed as a situation because things never get paid back, and now they're lost out on the finances and resources that they had. And the cosigner too. Again, they ultimately could pledge their life and have to be a bond servant to the individual back in the ancient days in regard to the default on the loan. So all of this is telling us to have prudence when making a financial or business decision. And it has to do with going back to, taking the advice of our elders or those who are wise around us, and not that we otherwise would enter into on our own, because if we just enter into the folly, there's going to be hell to pay. Okay, we're going to suffer for it. And that principle goes into this as well for the lender and the cosigner. And also the borrower, again, they basically, walk off into the sunset, you could say, but they're going to have a bad reputation because they defaulted on their loan. And they'll be hard-pressed to get another loan in the future. So in any case, the negative scenario is in view, but the positive scenario is also in view of making good, wise decisions. So wisdom entails looking ahead to the possible consequences, the actions, and that good, wise, prudent decisions, and it emphasizes the stupidity of this type of risk-taking that we should not have within our lives. Again, don't put your neck on the line is what's in view here, okay? Now, sometimes you're going to do that, okay? But when you put your neck on the line, as it were, you're going to do that for somebody you have a lot of confidence in, and somebody that you love dearly, you trust dearly, and ultimately you know that they're going to do what they say they do. Their word is good. So again, you can put your neck on the line for that individual, but don't be the stupid individual who puts your neck on the line for any Tom, Dick, and Harry that comes along. The stranger, the foreigner, and the sinner. Don't do that, because then you are the foolish one, and ultimately you will have problems as a result. So do not get involved in foolish entanglements is our principle. whether it be in any form of business or even relationships, because being careless with these things, whether it be money, our relationships, our business, our jobs, our family, our friends, whatever the case may be, it will be detrimental to us. And if it's in the monetary realm, it'll strip us of our resources so that we lose out on what we might have put in to the situation. Now, we are in a difficult spot versus the individual that is the borrower. Now, the Bible does tell us that we ought to be generous, we ought to be gracious, we ought to be giving and caring and kind with our resources. We should be giving people, but we don't do it recklessly. We're not throwing our money away, as it were. And we're not getting involved in foolish enterprises because, I got some swampland down in Florida if you want to buy it. Okay? You know what the funny thing about that swampland in Florida is all about? If those people stuck to that land, it's all developed now. Okay? And now it'd be wonderful land, okay? But, my mother's aunt, which was my great aunt, okay, she and her husband bought some land down in Florida back in the 60s or 70s, thinking that, maybe they'd build and retire down there one day. But it ended up being a swampland in Florida scenario, and they got taken in the situation. They got promised a bill of goods, and unfortunately, it didn't pay off in the end. And they lost out in the situation. So, again, don't be reckless. And also, learn to say no. Learn to say no. There's nothing wrong with saying no. And then, in addition to saying no, you should follow it up as to why. Because now you can be a wise counselor. Here's why I'm not going to follow up with you. Here's why I'm not going to co-sign for you. And it's not because I'm afraid or I'm scared, okay? But it's because of your behaviors and your track record. And I can't trust you, and I can't put my resources on the line for you because I don't think you're going to follow through with it. And you can have that good, wise discussion with them and then also help to counsel them, how do you get back on track? A lot of people and businesses have to declare bankruptcy because they get themselves in a jam, okay? Sometimes it's unintentional. Sometimes it's just bad decisions, okay? But once they declare bankruptcy, there are certain things they cannot do, and they cannot buy, and they can't get loans, and they can't do this. And so what do they have to do? They have to build up their credit once again. And they have to go through processes of little here, little there, little here, little there, and build up that reputation once again so that when they need a loan for something important, they look like a credible person once again. And ultimately, they are able to borrow. But if they never clean up their act once they declare bankruptcy, nothing's going to change. And it's just going to get worse and worse and worse for them. And they're going to be in dire straits as the situation goes. So in any case, take the opportunity to help that person. Help them understand why not, if it's a no, and then how you can help them to build up so that in the future it might be a yes. And put standards in place as to what they should and should not do. All right, so that gives us the understanding in regard to business relationships. And now let's bring it back to verse 14, which says, "He who blesses his friend with a loud voice and early in the morning will be reckoned, it will be reckoned a curse to him." So again, does this go along with everything we've just said? Doesn't sound like it on the surface, but you got to dig into the Hebrew, which I did, okay? And that's why I'm here. Because when you dig into the Hebrew, it's fascinating how Hebrew words have several different nuances based on the stem and, the voice, the mood, the tense, and all of that, and how it was used in the language. Because what it might say on the surface, which is this, as we have in this passage, is a literal translation of a friend who comes calling at the break of dawn, comes to your house and starts saying with a very loud voice how wonderful you are and you're a fantastic person and you're great and all of this, blah, blah, blah. And guess what? They do it every single morning. That's another nuance that you get out of the Hebrew that you don't get in English here, okay? They're doing it all the time. And what does that do? It wears you out. And again, if you're just waking up in the morning, do you want to have somebody yelling and screaming and loud voices to you early in the morning? I mean, we have to babysit our grandkids a couple days a week, and we go and pick them up in the morning. And you know, those kids, they want to scream right away. And we're always like, just wait till I have my cup of coffee, please. No, just kidding. Don't scream yet, okay? Keep it down, okay? Just kidding, okay? But in any case, you don't want to hear that loud voice first thing in the morning, okay? Even when it's praise. And what's interesting about this passage is, in and of itself, you have a friend who comes and blesses you. That's a positive thing. And he does it with a loud voice so that a lot of people can hear he's extolling you, lifting you up, raising you up in the front of other individuals. That's a good thing. But again, when you look at it in Hebrew, this isn't a good thing, okay? It's not a good thing. And then it says early in the morning, it will be reckoned a curse to him. So it's very interesting how we have this positive thing that happens in the first part of this verse. Oh yeah, the other positive aspect of the first half is that he's doing it early in the morning. And how many Proverbs do we have and do we read about in other passages in Scriptures about getting up early and getting going for the day? You know, if you rise up early, you're going to win the day, okay? It's like the early bird gets the worm type of scenario. It's all positive. But how is that reckoned as a curse to him? Well, the aspect of the nuance here is, and I've got it kind of in this opening principle for this verse, because this loud voice early in the morning, when you put all that together in the Hebrew, it really is talking about your friend who's coming over and he's laying a heavy burden on you. He's laying a heavy load down on you first thing in the morning. Because what would they do first thing in the morning back in the ancient days, especially if they were going on a journey? They'd take all their goods and products, all their heavy things, and they'd what? Load it up on the donkey. And they'd put their heavy burdens on the donkey, the beast of burden. And then they'd go on the journey. The loud voice in the morning coming early with your praises is another way of saying that in idiom. Your friend is actually coming over to lay a heavy burden down on your shoulders. In other words, that friend has some issue or problems or difficulty. He needs a loan. And he comes down and asks you, can you take this for me? Can you do this for me? Can you deal with this problem? Can you deal with this situation? Can you help me with this loan? Again, it goes back to our previous verse. Laying down a heavy burden on you. Again, don't let it happen. Don't let your friends let a heavy burden be laid down on your shoulders. And I'm, in business world, we used to call that put the monkey on the back. Okay, and you probably heard that. Okay, a monkey on the back, and it was inevitable. You'd be in the business realm, you'd be working, doing your job, and then somebody would come in, and they've got some problem or difficulty, and they'd be like, the next thing you know, they've just laid that problem on you. And you got to be very careful not to receive that problem and take that on, because it's their problem. And we call that the monkey on the back. The monkey was on their back. Don't let them put the monkey on your back, where now you have to deal with that situation and solve the problem or whatever the case may be. Okay? And that's what's in view here. Your friend comes over to lay down that heavy burden, on you. So now it's your responsibility. And as a result, it will be reckoned a curse to him. And here we have early in the morning, again, morning or dawn. Shakam is the Hebrew word, to rise or do something early. But that shakam also means to shoulder something or load up, as the beast of burdens were loaded early in the morning time. Load them up, load them up, load them up. And that's what the friend is doing here with this loud voice. Loud voice of praise. Now it's really about loading it up. And again, though the loud shouting in the morning is an irritating thing, and that in of itself, you could just say, that's going to be a curse to him, because you're going to be like, why is this guy always coming over and yelling and shouting in the morning? Why is he doing this? I'm not even awake yet, and he's screaming out loud. That's irritating enough, okay? After a while. But ultimately, the metaphor for all of this is laying down a heavy load upon your shoulders. And in the Hebrew, it also says repeatedly. The imperfect tense, where it happens over and over and over. It's an unfinished action. The imperfect and unfinished action, which means it continues. It's habitual or sometimes customary. Okay? So the negative outcome is that this friend be consistently viewed as one who does not keep his oaths. That's the other thing here. So let's put ourselves in the shoes of the friend who comes over with a loud voice laying the heavy load on you. You know, the curse on him is what's in view. It's not the curse on you, but the curse on him. And what's that all about? Well, because this friend has come over and kept laying things down on you, eventually you're going to get sick of that. And you're going to say, what kind of friend are you? I don't want you as a friend any longer. And again, people are going to know this too. Hey, here's a guy who asked to co-sign a loan, but he never follows up with his commitments. And now it's on the burden of me to fulfill his loans. And he does it all the time. People are going to know that. People are going to understand that. And they're going to look at that individual as someone that is not trustworthy. And someone to stay away, because you know when he comes over, it's not for your good. He says, hey, I'm coming to praise you, but he's really coming down to lay down some heavy burden upon your shoulders. Put the monkey on your back. That's why he's coming around. And people are going to know that. And what we also understand from the Hebrew is that the loud voice is that not only is it talking about an oath that he is making that he doesn't fulfill, but he's also using foul language, sins of the tongue. And there's even understanding of evil schemers in this view as well. Again, coming out of the Hebrew when we look at these words. So again, it's a little bit more than what we see on the surface of this passage. It's kind of interesting how we've seen other passages that don't follow the Hebrew and give more of a commentary of what it's all about. This one, I don't think the translators got it, and they just literally translated it, okay? But this is what it truly is all about. The and lays a heavy load and is a burden to you. And he thinks you're his beast of burden, which could be an abusive situation as well. You've got to steer clear of that. Not allow that to happen. Say no. And I'm not going to co-sign. I'm not going to take on this responsibility. And I'm not going to take your garbage or your guff any longer. I'm not going to be your beast of burden. No, I'm not going to do it. And let the negative suffering, because again, this individual who comes over with a loud voice in the morning, the individual comes and lays a heavy burden down on you, is what? The fool or the naive one that we've been talking about since the beginning of this passage. So you see all the tie-ins there, okay? You see how it all relates when you look at it from the scriptures. And so this individual will develop a bad reputation because of his actions of putting the monkey on someone else's back in a number of different ways, time and time again. And again, you don't want to be a friend of that type of person who's always looking for you to get them out of a jam or looking for you to solve their problems or whining and moaning and coming to you, oh, this happened and that happened, or my wife or my husband or blah, 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 blah. No, just deal with it yourself. Don't take on the load. And don't get involved in things that you should not be involved in. Again, going back to the business transactions. Don't get involved, in things that aren't good for you. So we wrap it up with a couple of principles. First is that good intentions gone wrong tells us that even blessings can be annoying if offered without thoughtfulness, timing, tone, and also sensitivity. Okay? Even blessings can be annoying if they have these things. They can say all the good words they want, but again, if there's all this other garbage loaded onto it, it is not going to be a blessing unto you. Number 2, don't receive or give foolish, heavy burdens from or to your friends or neighbors. Now, remember how, the previous passage said don't go to your brother's house in time of calamity, go to your neighbor because he's close by and can help you, okay? It's not saying you avoid your family, okay? But it basically saying, yeah, they can help you. But again, if there's an individual who's like time and time again coming and asking and there's no quid quo pro, again, That gets annoying after a while. And then it comes to find out that this is just a lazy individual who doesn't want to do their own work or their own job or take care of their own details of life, and they're just trying to lay that down on you to solve. Number 3, wisdom considers others. You know, it's not just about you. Remember, it's about others. And think about how, if you are going to ask your neighbor to help, what's it going to mean to them? How is this going to be a burden on them? And is it too heavy of a load for them to carry? And just because you're trying to offload your burdens doesn't mean you have the right to load it on to somebody else. Your burdens are your burdens. You got to deal with them. You got to go forward with it. You can ask for help. You can seek out guidance and wise counsel and wisdom. But again, don't lay down the burden of solving on others. It's yours and your responsibility to go forward. And again, God will help you with that. And true kindness is measured in love or by love, not by volume, okay? How often do I come over and sing his praises, okay? And again, the singing his praises is another flattery. We've talked about flattery, shining him on, buttering him up so that ultimately he'll do the things you want him to do. And then number 4, that be thoughtful in how you encourage or bless others. So now as the friend coming over and blessing in the morning, okay, be thoughtful how you do that, okay? And don't do it in a fake way. Don't do it in a flattering way because you're trying to get something from them and them to do something or take care of something for you. Because even though you may come later on with something that you mean for good, it may be received poorly because of how you've approached this individual time and time again. And you didn't express grace in the situation. So think about that. Think about how you're approaching other people, especially if you need help in a situation. Nothing wrong with that. Help. We're not saying that. And again, don't go down that path and ask anybody for help, okay? No, nothing wrong with that. But how you go about it. And then also how often and how burdensome it becomes. And so I want to leave you with this. I saw this on a Facebook feed pop up, and I said, I gotta put that up there because this goes right along with everything. But remember, as we've read these Proverbs and seen these passages, laziness kills ambition. Anger kills wisdom. Fear kills dreams. And jealousy kills peace. All right? Now read it backwards. Ambition kills laziness. Wisdom kills anger. Dreams kills fears. And peace kills jealousy. And all of that with the Word of God, the mind of Christ, as you have ambition, again, not inappropriate, inordinate competition and ambition, but appropriate ambition, the wisdom of God, the plan of God, the dreams that you have to go forward in the plan of God, and have the peace of God in your soul, you will be victorious over laziness, anger, fear, and jealousy that could creep up in life. All right, so let's close in prayer. Father, we thank you for this time. We thank you for your word. We thank you for these wonderful principles of simple wisdom and understanding that we can apply to our lives in various ways and means and modes and operations. And Father, we just ask, be a good friend and be a good witness. Or beautiful servants. And Father, we thank you for this time, and we ask that you lead us in our travels home this day to give us protection. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.